Some Hollywood legends didn't fall because of scandal blacklists or bad luck. They fell because of pure, unforced stupidity. One actor said no to three of the greatest scripts ever written for reasons so petty they still sound like a punchline today. Another lived his whole adult life like a child star who never grew up until a pointless argument ended it all at 31. And a five-time Olympic champion became a worldwide icon without ever learning to act, only to spend his final years in a nursing home still doing the same jungle yell for strangers. These aren't villains, they're cautionary tales. And actor number one's mistake, it accidentally created one of the biggest movie stars in history. George Raft, the star who built Bogart's career by accident. Imagine being one of Warner Brothers' biggest stars with gangster roles practically tailor-made for your face, then turning down three scripts that would go on to become some of the most celebrated films in Hollywood history. That's exactly what George Raft did in the early 1940s. His reasons weren't thoughtful artistic choices, they were remarkably short-sighted. He passed on High Sierra because he disliked his character dying at the end. He walked away from the Maltese Falcon because he refused to work with an unproven rookie director named John Huston. Insiders at the studio knew Raft rarely read his own scripts closely. He'd have assistants summarize the plot, then make career-defining decisions based on a rushed recap. Warner Brothers didn't try to talk him out of it. They simply suspended his pay and handed his rejected roles to a struggling contract player named Humphrey Bogart. The rest became film history. Raft's real downfall was mistaking his tough guy public image, reinforced by genuine friendships with mobsters like Bugsy Siegel, for actual acting range. He treated Hollywood like an extension of the underworld rather than a craft requiring growth. When post-war audiences began craving morally complicated anti-heroes, precisely the kind Bogart was now mastering, Raft had nothing left to offer. No versatility, no reinvention, no backup plan. By the 1950s, the phone calls stopped altogether. He eventually spent his later years greeting guests at a London casino, living off the memory of a career he'd given away one poor decision at a time. Carl Alfalfa Switzer, the child star who never grew up and paid with his life. If you think George Raft's ego was destructive, wait until you hear about the child star who never realized he wasn't a kid anymore, and it cost him his life. Every kid in the 1950s recognized the cowlick, the freckles, and the deliberately terrible singing voice. Carl Alfalfa Switzer was one of the most familiar faces in America thanks to the Our Gang shorts. But Hollywood has a brutal habit with child stars. It builds them up profits off their youth, then discards them the moment they stop being cute without ever teaching them how to survive what comes next. Switzer's real downfall wasn't aging out of the role. It was that he never understood the game had changed. As a kid at Hal Roach Studios, he was treated like royalty, free to pull pranks and disrupt sets because he was too valuable to discipline. But once he grew into an awkward, lanky young man, he expected that same treatment. He showed up to sets demanding star status he hadn't earned in years, acting entitled instead of humble, never bothering to learn the deeper craft mature roles required. The industry that inflated his ego didn't care about the psychological toll of losing child stardom. They simply saw a washed-up actor who wasn't useful anymore. Switzer bounced between odd jobs, including work as a hunting guide, making increasingly reckless decisions as if consequences happened only to other people. That mindset finally caught up with him. In early 1959, an argument over a lost hunting dog and a $50 reward escalated into a violent confrontation he refused to walk away from. He was dead at 31, not from Hollywood scandal, but from a lifelong failure to grasp the weight of his own actions. Johnny Weissmuller, the Olympic champion who couldn't say a sentence. Johnny Weissmuller became one of the highest-paid actors on the planet. For one specific reason, the studio realized he was physically incapable of delivering convincing dialogue. As a five-time Olympic swimming champion, he had the perfect body to play Tarzan in the 1930s. But the moment MGM put him in front of a camera, they hit a wall. The man simply couldn't act. He struggled to memorize basic lines, and his delivery was painfully stiff. So instead of training him, the studio built an entire character around his limitations. They gutted his dialogue down to grunts and broken English and manufactured his now iconic yell entirely in post-production. They didn't need an artist. They needed a profitable photogenic statue. That's precisely what they got. Weissmuller seemed completely fine with this arrangement. He never appeared to grasp just how thoroughly he was being managed. For nearly 2 decades, he swung from vine to vine, blissfully unaware that his entire career rested on a narrow engineered gimmick. He never pushed for harder roles, never questioned his contracts, never tried to actually learn the craft. He just kept playing the Jungle King until he aged out of the loincloth and the calls quietly stopped. Once he stepped outside MGM's protective bubble, his lack of real-world savvy became painfully obvious. He made a string of gullible, disastrous investments and burned through 5 marriages. He'd spent his prime years being managed like a product by executives who only cared about box office returns. And when they were finished with him, he had few practical skills left to fall back on, spending his final years in a care facility. John Agar, the man who got everything for free and blew it anyway. John Agar landed the most exclusive golden ticket in Hollywood without a single competitive audition. He didn't train, he didn't grind, he didn't pay his dues. He simply had the right jawline and, more importantly, married Shirley Temple. To studio executives in the late 1940s, Agar wasn't discovered talent. He was a built-in publicity machine. Producer David O. Selznick signed him immediately, and legendary director John Ford placed him right alongside John Wayne and Henry Fonda in the prestige Western Fort Apache. Suddenly surrounded by the biggest names in the industry, Agar completely misread the assignment. He mistook a manufactured PR opportunity for genuine, irreplaceable talent. Rather than recognizing how fragile his position actually was and working to catch up, he coasted. He showed up to sets unprepared, fumbling basic lines, treating a cutthroat industry like a casual country club. His off-screen life mirrored the same obliviousness, a string of DUI arrests and embarrassing tabloid headlines, all fueled by the delusion that his looks and his marriage made him untouchable. But the studio system never protects dead weight once the spotlight moves on. When Shirley Temple filed for divorce in 1949, Agar's invisible shield vanished overnight. Without her star power to hide behind, executives finally saw what had always been true: he still couldn't act, and he had zero discipline. They'd milked the marriage for every ounce of free press it was worth, and once it ended, so did their patience. Agar spent the following decades drifting into cheap C-grade monster movies, a steep fall from sharing a screen with John Wayne. His career didn't evaporate because of shifting tastes. It evaporated because a golden ticket means nothing if you refuse to learn the job. Bela Lugosi, the man who turned down immortality out of vanity. Bela Lugosi had just pulled off one of the great career triumphs in Hollywood history. His 1931 performance as Count Dracula turned him into an overnight sensation and reportedly helped save Universal Studios from bankruptcy. Naturally, the studio wanted to strike while the iron was hot. They were adapting another Gothic classic, Frankenstein, and everyone assumed Lugosi would step into the lead. There was just one catch: the producers didn't want him playing the Mad Doctor. They wanted him as the monster. Lugosi agreed to a screen test, and that's where his ego took over completely. An argument broke out with the makeup team over what the creature should look like, and when Lugosi realized the role would bury his face under heavy prosthetics and strip him of nearly all dialogue, he refused outright, reportedly dismissing the part as fit only for a background extra. He didn't want to be unrecognizable. He didn't want to be silent. He wanted to be a leading man, not a lumbering prop. That decision handed the role of a lifetime to a little-known actor named Boris Karloff, whose haunting, sympathetic performance made him an instant global star and the new face of horror cinema. Lugosi, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines as the exact kind of iconic, career-defining part he'd turned down became the most famous monster in movie history. It was a mistake he never recovered from. As Karloff's star kept rising through Bride of Frankenstein and The Mummy, Lugosi slid further down the cast lists, spending the rest of his career chasing the kind of stardom he'd once refused to share the screen with as a creature. Buster Keaton, the genius who signed away his own career. Vanity wasn't the only career killer in old Hollywood. Sometimes all it took was trusting the wrong contract, even when your closest friends begged you not to sign it. By the late 1920s, Buster Keaton wasn't just a movie star, he was one of the most successful independent filmmakers alive. He wrote, directed, produced, and starred in his own films, controlling every creative decision down to the smallest stunt. He owned a mansion in Beverly Hills next door to Rudolph Valentino, earned the modern equivalent of $60,000 a week, and had built from scratch exactly the kind of complete artistic freedom most performers could only dream of. Then, in 1928, he gave it all away willingly. Keaton signed a contract handing his career over to MGM, chasing the promise of financial security and studio backing. Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd, two of his closest peers, personally warned him not to do it, telling him he'd lose the independence that made him who he was. Keaton didn't listen, trusting a friend's promise that nothing would really change. Everything changed. MGM assigned him teams of writers, forced him through script committees, and buried his improvisational genius under corporate bureaucracy built for actors who needed that structure, not for a man whose entire creative process depended on the freedom to invent as he went. When Keaton pushed back and refused inferior films, the studio simply fired him for being difficult. The loss of control sent him spiraling into alcoholism. The man who once built the most expensive and celebrated stunt shot in movie history was reduced to churning out films he despised, later calling it the worst mistake of his life. A rare case of a legend destroying his own empire not through scandal, but by handing away the keys of his own free will. Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's biggest earner, who died with $18,000. If you think losing creative control was rough, wait until you hear about the child star turned biggest name in Hollywood who couldn't hold on to a single dollar of it. At the peak of the 1930s, Mickey Rooney wasn't just a star, he was the single biggest box office draw in the entire world, out-earning every other actor in Hollywood as MGM's beloved Andy Hardy. By the late 1970s, he was pulling in the modern equivalent of nearly $300,000 a week. Across an astonishing 9-decade career and over 300 films, Rooney generated what should have been one of the great fortunes in entertainment history. He blew through nearly all of it. Rooney married 8 times, and the divorce settlements alone drained millions. His fourth wife's payout in 1958 would be worth over $4 million today. He was also a compulsive gambler who couldn't walk away from the racetrack or the card table, chasing losses with borrowed money for years on end. Old studio contracts didn't include residuals or royalties, so unlike modern actors, Rooney never earned a cent from any of his films airing again. Every dollar had to come from active ongoing work, and the moment the job slowed down, so did the income. By 1962, he filed for bankruptcy with just $500 in cash against $500,000 in debt. He clawed his way back only to lose it all again, filing bankruptcy a second time in 1996. In his final years, he even sued his own stepson, alleging the man had mismanaged and drained what little money he had left. When Mickey Rooney died in 2014 at age 93, one of the highest-paid performers who ever lived his entire estate was valued at just $18,000. A stark reminder that a fortune earned isn't the same as a fortune kept. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who drank away his own legend. You're the single biggest action star on the planet. The man whose name literally became slang for effortless success, in like Flynn. Within a decade, your own reputation becomes the thing that destroys you. That's exactly what happened to Errol Flynn. It wasn't studio politics or bad scripts that did it. It was his own reckless choices piling up one after another until there was nothing left to protect him. By the early 1940s, Flynn had it all, leading roles in Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, a reputation as Hollywood's most charming rogue, and a public image built entirely on the idea that his wild lifestyle was just harmless fun. Then in late 1942, 2 teenage girls accused him of statutory rape, one incident allegedly on his own yacht. The trial became a national sensation, and though a jury acquitted him in 1943, the damage to his image was permanent. Insiders would later say the trial marked the real beginning of his decline, both personally and professionally. Rather than course-correcting, Flynn doubled down on the same behavior that had put him there. His drinking spiraled into full-blown alcoholism. In his final years, he was reportedly consuming staggering amounts of alcohol daily, and his health collapsed under the weight of it, leaving him looking decades older than his real age. His last film, a low-budget vanity project, paired him on screen with his final companion, a much younger woman he'd been involved with for several years. Flynn died at 50, physically wrecked and professionally irrelevant, having spent the back half of his career quietly dismantling the legend his early films had built. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you in the next one.